We are back on MorningLine. Thank you for joining us. Our guest is David Plazas with the Tennessean. We're talking this morning about, as you see on the screen, should access to recordings and other records be limited from the government, you know, and he's written an editorial on that. And if you'd like to join the conversation, 737-7587. So have we slowly, David, seen more restrictions just coming, as you've said? I mean, is the trend going toward locking things down as opposed to opening them up?
Well, progressively, we've seen, for example, about 25 years ago, there were about 80 exemptions, and today there's nearly 600 exemptions to the public record. So the trend is going upward, and my hope is that with the legislative committee, and I will tell you, there are many lawmakers who are very dedicated to transparency, so it's not like there's a bunch of villains there saying we want to keep everything secret. But one thing we're trying to compel or persuade these legislators to do is to say, think about the fact that so much has already been made secret. Does that need to be so? So I'd mentioned the Amazon case before. There's a lot of talk now, and there's actually some very good bills that would open up things related to tax incentives, you know, or you know, how do they get set? How do those contracts get fixed? You have the situation of Electrolux, the company that had a plant in Memphis that's closing, and they don't have to return any of the money that they got from the state because the contract didn't require it. And the question is, should the public be more informed? In my mind, yes, and I understand there's some trade secret issues you've got to be very conscious about. But it also opens up a debate about, are these tax incentives good things? And that's another question altogether that should be constantly debated by the public.
Yeah, and they have to have the information to be able to debate it, right?
Absolutely.
Gosh. You know, sometimes though you wonder if why do people want things locked down and others want it open, and it can vary from case to case. We were talking about the situation right now with Andrew Delkey and this whole case that's going to be decided this week. I think the judge is going to rule on a motion which would seal all discovery moving forward in this case. That's been asked for by the defense, Delkey's attorney. Meanwhile, the district attorney, Glenn Funk, has all along said in this case he wants it open and transparent, and we know from the very beginning he was releasing the video of the shooting that was involving Delkey and Daniel Hambrick. But then he wants it open. We go back to the Vanderbilt rape case, and you know, the prosecutor's office wanted everything sealed down. We actually even sued to get access, right, to the cell phone calls and messages. And so, you know, you just wonder, you know, the same office has taken a different stand on two different cases. Is that because of politics? Is that because the cases are that different, which of course they are, but what?
No, we'd have to ask DA Funk.
Yeah, you just don't know, but isn't it interesting, Al? You know, in one case, the DA's, and I know it started under Tory Johnson, but the DA's saying, let's lock it down, we don't want the media having it. In this other case, you know, which is highly politicized, frankly, this Delkey case, we want it open and transparent.
Yeah, you know, the question is, who gets a fair trial? I mean, and what
that always comes up, doesn't it? Yeah,
exactly. And does information being out there prevent someone from getting a fair trial?
That's what the defense would argue.
Yeah, it really depends. But this is certainly a matter of public interest. When you have a peace officer, a public safety officer, kill somebody, that is that's news of public interest, and the public should understand what happened, why it happened. Was this a training issue? Was this something that was appropriate? Was it not appropriate? And obviously, this is why court proceedings are open in this way. When media organizations, including the Tennessean, sued for those text messages in the Vanderbilt rape trial, it wasn't to get salacious photos, or it was really to understand what was the communication, who knew what. And unfortunately, I was at the Supreme Court hearing where it went all the way to the state Supreme Court, and unfortunately they ruled against us. Did
they, as you recall, and I remember when all this happened, what was their rationale? Do you remember at all what the opinion was, why they said we're not? It wasn't because this was a case involving a sex crime.
No, it was about the ability for the police to keep investigative information private while an investigation was ongoing. One of the problems we have right now is that, for example, if the police department, once it finishes an investigation, then we can get access to a lot of things. In the case of TBI, the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, they can keep their records secret forever, in perpetuity. And we've had writers in the past for our network talk about the fact that we should reconsider that. How can we sunset that to make sure that that kind of information is also available?
You know, yeah, whenever things are sealed up for a long time beyond it, I mean, maybe it's just the skepticism in me as a journalist. The big thing, folks, is don't for a second think that this sometimes is not used to cover things up and to hide things that are embarrassing, okay? I mean, sometimes it's very legitimate, oh, we can't, it'll damage the investigation. But that's the other thing, at the federal level. You know, I mean, it's real easy for any top politician or lawmaker to claim national security. Boom. Shuts it down, baby. You say national security, shuts it down. And I'm guessing 50% of those claims are crap because they don't want certain things. I just don't buy it. I'm skeptical. I hear national security. I'm not thinking, oh, there must be something sensitive there. I think a lot of it's just covering it up because there's embarrassing information in there they don't want out. That's just my take. And more often than not, when it is finally revealed, I'm dead on right.
Well, you know, that has been the case. And also, we look at tax returns, for example. You know, the president hasn't released his tax return. Governor Lee didn't release his tax return. Former Governor Haslam didn't release his tax return. And they have various reasons for it. But one of the reasons that we want to see those documents is so the public can know, are there any conflicts of interest that we should be aware of? And that's essentially it.
Basic thing. All right. I mean, I do see that, you know, you were at the Press Association. The governor came and spoke.
Yes.
And now he said the right things, right? I mean, he more or less said it's important to have free press.
Yes.
Or electronic media. What was your sense of his comments?
I have a sense that he's sincere about it, and I'm hopeful that he will continue to commit to that. And you know, we've had good contact with his communication staff. He'll be giving his remarks, I think it's next week. He'll be giving his address to the people, and he'll be talking about his expectations for the state, to the legislature, to the General Assembly.
March 4th.
And my hope is that he does bring up that issue of openness and transparency and makes it a key part of his initiatives.
Well, he's right. And by the way, we will carry that live on March 4th. But yeah, he says without a free press, we don't have a free country. And people need to understand that. Hey, look, journalists, we take a beating sometimes, and we deserve it sometimes. Don't get me wrong. But really, if all of a sudden, you know, the news coverage just disappeared and the investigative stuff disappeared, there's just no question. It would be a bad place.
We go back to one fundamental. The Founding Fathers created the First Amendment to essentially keep government honest through a free press. And obviously, you know, we do take our beatings, and at times we've seen irresponsible actors and irresponsible actions, but the question is ultimately it is about accountability on behalf of the people. A free press creates, you know, helps sustain and create an open society.
A couple of the other ones. So a ban on live streaming. I was seeing that. Of course, you know, I carry my cell phone everywhere, and I've live streamed many a time on Facebook, Facebook Live. From, for instance, just a few weeks ago, over just down the road, there was an anthrax scare over at the Department of Parole. I was there doing it. And it was fascinating to watch, and thank goodness it turned out to be bogus. But now that's not what it's targeting here. This would be a ban on live streaming in House committees at the legislative level?
In committees and...
But that's public, isn't it?
It is public, so the public could still attend, but it would be it's a rule right now that allows chairs of committees to ban it or not to ban it. And even certain legislators have opposed it because they say, first of all, there's no written down policy that this should be the law. But number two, the question is, how do you access this information if you're not in the room? Not everybody can attend these meetings in Nashville. If you're in Memphis, or if you're in Knoxville or Johnson City or Bristol, you know, you might not be able to get to Nashville to watch your legislator do business. Now, obviously, there is a mobile channel. You can watch legislative meetings live through the website. Not everybody knows how to access it, and sometimes they feel more comfortable having their own legislator or maybe their own advocate, let's say their lobbyist, live stream these things so they can understand what exactly is going on and what's happening. Yeah. And that's an effective tool. You know, I know that an argument has been made that this could potentially disrupt the business of government, but the business of government should be open. So I don't think it should be.
How would it disrupt it? And as you say, many lawmakers live stream themselves.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I can't defend that particular argument, but the only thing I can think of is that if it creates a situation where people start to grandstand as opposed to do business, quote unquote, that might be a concern. But ultimately, these things have to be open, and you know, filibustering and grandstanding has been a long tradition in our politics.
Yes, no kidding. And then you touched on it earlier, the one on discouraging gadflies. Just so folks know, this might be someone who is just overzealous and is asking for everything in the moon constantly, and it's become such a burden. And I guess under the law you can't really say no. They have a right to ask for it, but I understand that. You know, there has to be a line, and I know sometimes our investigative team probably has to ask on a sequence of records over a period of time, and they're respectful, and you understand it takes time. But someone who's just constantly asking for everything, like maybe putting in a request to say, look, every time this is filed, I want a copy of it, or something like that, for perpetuity. Can you not shut someone down on that legally?
Well, I mean, we have to be very careful about that because, again, talking about a slippery slope, I mean, if you want to punish someone but end up punishing everybody for that person's misactions, that's not a really good way to make laws or make policy.
Might be a better way to deal with gadflies. I mean,
I would think, you know, I would like to hear in the debate, what is the specific concern? You know, how often is this being abused? Because if it's only one person who's doing this, that's not fair to the rest of Tennessee. And most people probably aren't putting in public records requests, and the people who do should be respectful to the public custodians, but sometimes it's an issue of, you know, people feel that they're not being heard, so they feel they have to be more aggressive. Maybe they feel they're not getting the information on time, and sometimes a lot of public agencies are assigning someone who already has another job together to be the public records custodian.
I was going to ask you that. Is that your knowledge? I mean, there's not someone necessarily in these public agencies that are dedicated to public records requests. They usually have other tasks that are a full-time job, and so when a request comes in, it's just something extra they have to do. Is that correct?
You know, it depends on the agency.
I know that is with certain PIOs I've worked with municipalities who, the ones I've worked with have been very good. I mean, from Don Aaron to Kyle Evans, who used to work there, and now Larry Flowers in Murfreesboro. They're very good, but they would always tell me, Kyle, and even Don I haven't talked to in a while, but that, you know, they do a lot of other things. And then a request comes in, I'll say, Kyle, what have you been doing today? And he's like, well, I've spent the last week putting this request together for, you know, this reporter who asked for that. And he has to do it. And he's happy to, but it puts everything else on the back burner.
Yeah, you know, one of the things that we definitely recommend to the public and also the journalists is be specific and work with the public records custodian, because it may be that you're asking for something and that there could be a better way to ask it. And if you have a cooperative public information officer, that could be someone who could say, okay, you know, let's craft the request this way. Or what exactly are you looking for? You know, that negotiation process, because oftentimes it's painted as an adversarial process, which sometimes it is. But hopefully, in most cases, you can have that conversation to say, look, I'm really interested in understanding why certain agency did this, and I am looking for this specific piece of information around this time of year. Can you help me get that information? And obviously, you know, there's a process. You can certainly go to the Tennessee Open Government. We have an association as well, TCOG, Tennessee Coalition on Open Government. You can go to their website, and they actually have many suggestions for how you can actually access these public records and forms, and also understand what's going on.
Do you have to have a specific form when you submit a public records request?
No.
You don't, do you? No. I mean, I've done it myself, where you approach the contact either with a letter or an email, and you say, this is a public records request. You date it and say what your purpose is and what you're seeking as specific as you can, and then you sign it and you send it off. And sometimes they'll respond back and say, we've received this. They usually have 2 weeks to accommodate you.
There's a 72-hour period. And,
okay, so 72, and then
just to get a response, and it may be that the actual request may take longer than that, because one of the callers alluded to, you know, what you have to redact essentially, and so sometimes there's redactions, you know, like social security numbers, because the goal again is not to, you know, put someone at threat of identity theft, for example, which is a real issue.
And I understand that.
But it's a question of, we want to know what exactly happened, who knew what, when. Was the action taken that was, you know, was it important? And so, for example, one active investigation that we have at this moment has to do with Collier, the company that Metro has contracted out for sidewalks and other things. And, you know, what exactly are they charging? And our reporters have gone into that and looked at, you know, were they charging excessively? What was the actual rate? And really to understand, you know, is Public Works, you know, are there officials, you know, when there was a picture found of them being entertained at Bridgestone Arena for a Predators game, was that an appropriate use of tax dollars? And so these are some of the things that you can see if you make a public records request and start digging a little bit deeper.
Let's take a break on that note. We'll come back with more phone calls in our final segment with our guest right after this.